It's been a year and some change since the last major content update for Sonic Frontiers dropped. The Final Horizon was definitely an interesting experiment, but not one that came without caveats. I never did wind up making a separate analysis of that since my Vanilla Frontiers video, but a lot of it would just be ranting about the insane Master Coco trials. That said, given the timetables of these things, it was only natural to expect a new Sonic product to get shipped out in tandem with the inevitable advent of Sonic Movie 3. For this reason, the reveal of Sonic X Shadow Generations wound up being not much of a surprise. Expanded remasters are all the rage these days, just look at what Nintendo did with Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury for a taste of how well that can work out. So upgrading one of Sonic's most beloved titles for modern consoles is a really safe bet, and tacking on a bite-sized experience that retreads all of Shadow's character beats would be a great way to catch newcomers who missed or refused to return to the 2001 to 2006 era games back up to speed. Last October, I spent a considerable amount of time talking about my conflicting feelings on Shadow's solo game from 2005. I still came out of that experience not being a huge fan of the game, but seeing it through with a fresh adult perspective really helped me appreciate what it was going for, and ultimately the catharsis it gave Shadow as a character. But here's Shadow Generations to rip the band-aid off an old wound and explore what happens when it doesn't quite heal properly. And the results have gotten mixed reactions from a crowd that is often hard to please. Some people call this game's story beautiful, while some decry it as a regression of character for Shadow that exists purely in conflict with the message of his titular game. Where do I fall on this spectrum? As per usual, I prefer to look on the lighter side, so I actually have quite a few thoughts about why I feel it gives the prickly ultimate lifeform his rated T for teen flowers. Let's get into it. This is why I think Shadow Generations is so good. Before getting neck-deep into narrative, which is primarily what I want to focus on here, we should briefly delve into Shadow Generations as a gameplay experience first. Obviously, coming off the heels of Frontiers, Shadow has been given tweaks to match up with the feel of more recent titles. His movement is much lighter, turning feels faster, and generally the sluggishness of Boost Sonic's race car physics appear greatly stripped back. This is fantastic, in a double-edged sword kind of way. The all-consuming brain rot that is Sonic physics muscle memory took some effort to relearn, but by the time I was a few stages in, I'd come around to living and learning with it and found it very fun to control. But by contrast, I'd say it actually weakens Sonic's side of the package, which is largely untouched in this department. And by comparison, that makes everything else in Generations more difficult to come back to. But if that's the worst thing I can say about it, we're on easy street for once. Speaking of living easy, Shadow's additional abilities are also very well implemented. You have your run-of-the-mill chaos powers like Chaos Control and Spear, allowing you to briefly stop time and hurl projectiles, and they both work as well as you'd hope. But what I really like about Chaos Control specifically this go-around is that it actually has a practical use beyond skipping a huge chunk of the stage or getting tons of bullets, and that it's rarely ever mandatory aside from some cool QuickTime cinematics, and this can encourage some pretty creative use of it to optimize your routes. Shadow Gens is full of different ways to play and different paths to go down. It's got interesting movement tech and solid mechanical depth. I can see myself cutting narrower and narrower times on these stages as a result, and if you can't speedrun a Sonic game, then what's the point? That's also one of the best aspects of the cyberspace stages in Sonic Frontiers. It had great opportunities to exploit Sonic's moveset, it just was combined with weaker overall physics, and those abilities feeling largely unintentional. It felt like it wasn't really living up to its potential, even if the Final Horizon did improve on them significantly. Shadow stages here feel like those capabilities have been fully realized, leaned into intentionally, and to top it all off, they're stages which run significantly longer and have their own distinct level themes. Sure, these are, by virtue of Generations' premise, still past concepts getting re-explored, but at least they're ones we haven't seen a million times in the past few years, and feel a lot fresher to see reimagined. In addition to Shadow's plain-bred chaos powers though, we also have Doom powers, which are also pretty fun. Shadow's blood ties to Black Doom lets him evolve and gain them as needed throughout the campaign, though your mileage may vary on how well they operate for your playstyle. Oh, right, did I mention that Black Doom is back?
Shadow! I got a Wonder Ball on loan from this guy from Smash Ultimate, and I hatched from it. I feel so alive.
Funny.
I thought you were supposed to be dead.
No, I didn't feel like it. Now, how are you enjoying your return to the anomalous flashback cube?
I'm not.
You'll never appreciate anything I do for you.
You have literally tried to kill me on multiple occasions.
That's how the Black Arms express affection.
Really? Then I suppose you wouldn't mind if I expressed mine?
Wait, no.
Doom Spear is just Chaos Spear, but more, so it doesn't bear much repetition. Doom Blast is too context sensitive for my liking, but I can't lie and say it isn't extremely satisfying to line up a kick and go to town, especially when you're making a split-second decision about where the ensuing teleport will lead you. Doom Surf is hilarious. You're also only using this one when the game tells you to, but it's not bad. Really makes me think of a better controlling jet ski from Crash Bandicoot 2. Doom Morph is by far the odd one out of the pack, allowing you to fuse with toxic goop and swing from suspended spheres of the stuff. Its movement feels both sluggish and erratic at the same time, if that's even possible, and its swinging takes some finesse to really get a grapple on. Literally. That said, when you do finally manage to figure it out, it's satisfying stringing efficient movements together with it. The star of the show has to be Doom Wing, though. It's unlocked initially for the final 2 stages of the game, that is a sort of substitute super transformation with 50 rings, but also becomes usable in every previous stage after completing the campaign. To say this is major would be an understatement. Playing these levels over again with these new opportunities feels like an entire new playground has opened up. We're going to need separate speedrun categories for people running this game with and without Doomwing, not only because of the differences it introduces, but because watching people take advantage of those opportunities in synergy with their regular gameplay is compelling enough to watch on its own. The campaign has a total of 6 stages with 2 acts and 4 bosses, which while short, feels very focused and slick as a result. I'd imagine the dev time was largely fixated here, and it was well worth it. You start off with the Space Colony arc, which has a banger remix collaboration by Jun Senoway and Teddy Lloyd, of all people. It is simply bliss to the ears. Seeing the arc in all of its glory in HD is pretty awesome, though it does admittedly remind me of Outside the Death Egg from Sonic Forces a little too much. Getting to go inside is a lot of fun though, and damn, the artificial chaos looks so good. This might be a good time to say that every Act 2 is more of a 2D in 3D kind of stage, as opposed to the full 3D stages of all the first acts. Usually, I'm not a big fan of these segments in Boost Sonic games, but I think they really made it work here. They took the criticisms to heart because these feel significantly less blocky and awkward to control. The camera is way more dynamic and the paths are generally way more interesting than before. Shadow's additional abilities spicing things up helps out immensely too. Several zones also have a segment where Black Doom shows up to taunt Shadow and whisks him into a kaleidoscopic hell version of Radical Highway.
Like everything else you do, this makes me want to vomit.
I call it the magic eye world. If you stare long enough at the skyline, you might see Maria.
I know of tumors more agreeable than you.
I don't know of any that are less ugly than you, though.
Bitch?
These segments have sort of become a meme, but I'll save expanding on it for when we get to the story. Every zone also has challenge acts, similar to vanilla generations, but I find most of these a lot more enjoyable, personally. They're quick and easy, and though they're definitely here to pad out the runtime by making you collect boss keys, it's padding I have no real issue with overall, even if not every challenge is a winner. Rail Canyon from Sonic Heroes is up next, and man, it sure feels nice to see Sonic Heroes get some love. This is kind of a strange pick for Shadow, though. Heroes wasn't a huge game for him all told, aside from the Amnesia plotline and the formation of Team Dark, but I still feel like there might have been better picks. Egg Fleet could have worked really well for Shadow, considering it's not only where he briefly remembers being in space in Sonic Heroes, but is also a stage that has aesthetic bleed-through into Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, which, aside from the appearance of the Black Arms, is woefully underrepresented in this game. We don't even get any reprise of I Am All of Me, which isn't my all-time favorite Shadow theme, but throw us a bone, will ya? Could have threaded the needle a bit better, I don't know. Gripes aside, it still looks fantastic, and it is so satisfying to destroy that stupid train after 20-odd years. The boss of this area is the Bio Lizard, and seriously, what an improvement. Gone are the annoying gutters between the platforms that instantly swoop you into the water to your death, his belching void attack is way more manageable, and the fight itself has more of a dynamic feel to it due to it now having separate phases. Incorporating his usual weaknesses for the sake of familiar players, and then turning it on its head when he grows his nasty membrane wings and starts jumping around, yeah, that's pretty sick. And Gerald said he'd never be ballin'. It's a simple fight all told, mainly just comprised of waiting for him to open up his weak point, but it's good enough for government work. Kingdom Valley from Sonic 06 was such an awesome addition to the roster, and it looks absolutely gorgeous here. Happy to see they put the effort into remodeling the Eagle and those dinky little Eggman bots from 06 itself. Just too bad we couldn't get a cameo from Pele, the beloved dog. I think this stage is proof enough that even if you didn't play Project 06, that Sonic 06's level themes and designs were always solid. It was just always undercut by literally every other aspect of itself. But this plays like a dream, especially when you get to the original indoor Mach Speed section, and they thought that it couldn't be done, but you can actually control it.
Oh yeah, the indoor section!
Sunset Heights from Sonic Forces makes its grand return to minimal fanfare. Okay, that's a little harsh, because they found a way to make me care about a Sonic Forces stage that doesn't have Infinite's theme in the background. Sunset Heights was, for my money, always the marketing stage for that game anyway. Makes sense to make it the best of that crop if you had to pick one from all the runts in that litter. The visuals are gorgeous, the remix kicks ass, and the cinematics with the Death Egg robots, yeah, I might have felt like, however old I was in 2017 again for a second when I saw that. Don't look into it. The next couple of bosses are big standouts. First we have Metal Overlord, who looks absolutely amazing, and actually makes pretty creative use of Doomsurf for his fight. He's not incredibly tough, but I respect that his attacks are well telegraphed while also simultaneously being hard to dodge in the window of opportunity they give you. I do wish the final stage had more than just the average knocking trash into him to chip away health routine, but hey, at least we get to hear what I'm made of again. The real one everyone was waiting for, though, of course, was Mephiles the Dark.
Yeah, there he is!
Oh no, he's gonna use the move that kills Sonic!
Yo! And he just dodges it like it's nothing.
Taking his chance to spawn back in from the darkness dimension that houses Sonic 06's strange canonicity. Mephiles is one of those rule of cool villains who, despite his narrative shortcomings, has always persisted due to sheer hype factor, and honestly, I'm happy to see him again. Seeing him desperate to worm his way back into existence and then being absolutely decimated by a shadow who doesn't even remember him, oh, it is so cold in the best possible way. Holy hell, it's so badass. He has several little phases here, and while none of them are particularly deep gameplay-wise, they are absolutely designed to make you squeal if you have even the slightest fondness or nostalgia for the train wreck he comes from. And when you've been as deeply rooted in Sonic as I have, yeah, I'm the target audience. This isn't my favorite fight in the game on a technical level, but purely on vibes, it easily came out on top. This funnels us towards the endgame, starting with Chaos Island from Sonic Frontiers, which we all surely agree is weird, considering it's from a future point in time. I guess also like Sunset Heights, come to think of it, but also the fact that Shadow isn't even in that game, but you can easily handwave it with Time Eater shenanigans. So long as it's fun, I couldn't really care less. This stage makes heavy use of the swinging with Doom morph, which means you definitely have to get used to it to get any mileage. Black Doom is gonna flip if you don't get him those pizzas. Make sure you use the right cheese, he only likes Sargento. By the way, I don't care what the Sonic Twitter naysayers have to say about it, the stage remix is great. Sure, it's different, but this series already has a diverse soundscape across the board. I don't want to hear anything about it not sounding like Sonic or whatever. Any genre of music can sound like Sonic music given the right flair. The visuals are also gorgeous, and they make great use of Frontier's relative simplicity and more naturalistic environments. Using the morph pools to its advantage when it wants to create color contrasts, and doing well to put a lot of the focus on the still beauty of these massive stretches of land and its rolling fog. Yeah, it's just, you know, it does something. Reminds me a bit of the majesty evoked by Red Mountain in Sonic Adventure, actually, and that's a good feeling to have. I'd say more about it, but my old-ass Dreamcast refuses to play the stage's music for some reason, and if you say play DX, I'm going to make you explode into cartoon bones! But of course, the final stage is one that's hinted at throughout a majority of the campaign. Radical Highway. A bookend to Shadow's personal journey by plopping him back down into a psychedelic rendition of his very first playable stage in the franchise. This all takes place within the bizarre structure of the Black Moon, a multi-eyed, biblically accurate-looking abomination which is apparently accumulating power for the Black Arms. Here's where you'll be fully encouraged to go crazy with Doomwing for the first time, and it makes the levels even more fun to blast through knowing they're designed with that in mind. The platforming gets tough here, but never in a way that feels excessively unfair, just in a way that feels like it's taking into account the skills you've needed to accumulate to make it this far. This is also reflected very well in the fight with Black Doom himself, returning back to his Devil Doom form, or should I say, Neo Devil Doom. God, he is taking pointers from f***ing Cell. It is so peak.
Oh, please. There's not a shrink qualified enough to deal with that hot mess.
You end up using a lot of your different Doom powers throughout the phases to whittle away at him, and none of them are superbly interesting on their own, but they combine together well. It's a fun boss, I just wish there was some more meat on its bones. And generally, yeah, that's about as much as I have to say about Shadow Generations from the game feel perspective. The levels themselves are really fun, the control is tight, the extra moves are well implemented, the bosses kick ass, and the mini open zone balances itself nicely with the rest of the experience in a way that retains a lot of the interesting ideas of Frontiers, while doing a lot more to prioritize the action stages within it and make them way more fun to play than the cyberspace levels were. We've really got some synergy here, and I'm excited at the implications of what a bigger Sonic game employing this approach could achieve if Sonic Team really put their mind to it, especially if it has an expanded narrative of this quality, because yes, Shadow Generations also succeeds on the merit of its storytelling, something that, as you know, I'm all about. So now let's finally get rambling about that, because I have way more to say about it than I thought I would going into it.
Hello, your name's Shadow, isn't it?
I don't really pay
My
attention.
good buddy, Froggy?
What is that? What was that? What was the
Everybody
studio
clap for
audience
him.
clapping?
That was me.
Okay, I genuinely thought that was in the game for a second.
As per usual, to provide maximum context to make sure we're all on the same page, let me very quickly give a basic gist of the plot so we can bounce toward our discussion from there. We begin with a series of prologue animations, detailing Shadow's time spent on the Ark with Maria, interspersed within strange dreams which feel like portents of misfortune. To the ultimate lifeform, who's learned never to turn a blind eye to a wary feeling, this points him back towards the Ark, where it seems a strange presence has been detected by Gun. In exchange for help breaking into their base to secure a rocket, Shadow reluctantly acquiesces to Rouge's request to attend Sonic's upcoming birthday bash from Sonic Generations, and wreaks a little havoc alongside her and Omega. He's almost stopped on his way there, but the order to nuke him from orbit is called off by Mr. Abraham Tower, the gun commander from Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, who is now officially rocking his Archie Sonic name. Good for him, and now he's gone. Shadow makes his way to the space station and lo and behold discovers that a weakened Black Doom has been biding his time there, slowly recombobulating himself with the spare energy from the troops of his hive mind that still had outstanding obligations in space, as well as what appears to be a remnant of his DNA that was still sealed in the Ark from the past, which led to this regeneration. At least I think that's what happened. They don't really plainly state the specifics for you. I just kind of took some of the statements that he made and tried to work it into a sensical thing. Look, I don't know. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. Either way, he didn't die at the end of Shadow 05. Too bad. With his hate juice at full capacity once again, he's determined to finish what he started with Shadow last time. But at the exact same time, the Time Eater from the original plot of Generations begins its hostile cross-timeline takeover, launching both Shadow and Doom into white space, where the game's events will now largely take place. The opposing goals are now clear. Doom is wise to Shadow's capabilities now, and though he still wants to use the Hedgehog for his own apocalyptic gain, he's learned enough from the experience to know he can't use his typical playbook. This time, while he does try to tap into Shadow's anger and trauma, there's a decidedly more possessive slant to his words and actions. Shadow's overtaken by mutations which reside from within his Black Arm's DNA, a powerful symbol of Doom's attempted grasp over him and his better nature, and this is all in service of a much different ultimate goal. If Doom can't mold Shadow into a perfect puppet, he'll browbeat Shadow into a perfect vessel instead. One that serves not as his alien absentee dad's right-hand man, but as a meat suit for Doom to revive himself within. Yeah, he knows Shadow's more powerful than he is, but that won't matter if he can break the Hedgehog's spirit long enough to leave that body open for him.
Once I get in your body, I'm gonna throw you into a meat grinder.
You mean you'll throw yourself into a meat grinder?
What? No, that would be dumb.
But you'll be controlling my body,
Yeah, so?
and therefore you'll feel everything that my body feels.
Yeah, I guess.
So then my body will be your body at that point, essentially.
Makes sense.
So then if you hurt that body, you will hurt yourself.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be me, though.
Meanwhile, Shadow's goal is ostensibly to stop Doom, regain control of the timeline, and bring everything back to normal. There is a complication present, though. Gerald and Maria. Yes, his lost creator and his sister, they're both here with him, invited to this universal liminal space due to the Time Eater shenanigans. Shadow knows their ultimate fate is to be lost to him, something he's tried to cement in his heart since 05, but seeing your lost loved ones right in front of you is another matter entirely, isn't it? This makes things difficult for the poor guy. He begins to convince himself that he might be able to avert their fate, change it somehow. But like his favorite Linkin Park song, in the end, doesn't even matter. Shadow gains control over the invasive appendages that Doom seeks to control him with and turns them against his presumptive master, finally destroying him for good while retaining the peace of mind and commitment to hope that Maria instilled in him so long ago. Despite the difficulty of parting from them again, Shadow accepts Maria's words. Even if fate tears them apart, she will always be in his heart. Running off tearfully as the game closes. Oh, there's also some fun stuff in there where he tricks Sonic with the fake emerald from Sonic Adventure 2 so that he has an excuse to hold on to a real Chaos Emerald for most of the Generations plot. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Like, damn, Sonic really couldn't tell them apart? He thought he was so smug and smart for trying to pawn that one off on Eggman back in the day, and yet he got bamboozled even more easily, nerd. But let's calmly look at the floating alien in the room. Did this regress Shadow's character? I've seen a lot of people claim that Shadow's 05 outing was all about him deciding to cast his past aside, to look forward without ever looking back, and that this game takes him back to constantly thinking about Maria and what he's lost, just to have him yearn for her return and jeopardize his world momentarily to chase that dream. Surely now that Shadow has decided to never turn back, he would never feel this way or even entertain the thought, right? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I think trauma, and especially grief over a lost loved one, is far more complicated than making one choice. And there are absolutely ways to square this away with what we've gotten from Shadow's character so far. The way this especially rings true to me is in the prologue animation, Dark Beginnings. Here we have several focus moments showing us some of Shadow and Maria's time together aboard the Ark, and Shadow's first reaction to these dreams of the past in episode 1 are extremely telling. When he comes out of his trance and suspects Doom may be involved, he remarks that these are no mere nightmares. The assumptive nature of these words says a lot with what they don't. Shadow has nightmares about this stuff frequently enough, even now, to easily tell the difference. At the end of episode 3, when Shadow begins his return to space, he can't help but immediately reflect on the time he spent with Maria, and promptly begins having a panic attack. He has to steel himself to return to his senses, and even then, it's something he can only accomplish by telling himself to stop thinking about it and return to his mission. He prioritizes any form of distraction over the grief in an attempt to defeat it, and I think this tracks with the idea of completely turning his back on the past. Sure, it's very powerful to say that you won't let that past shackle or torment you, but it's another entirely to view any rumination on it as a failure that you need to overcome. Shadow took the lesson he learned a smidge too far in the opposite direction, and now he's paying the price. That's an interestingly human development to undergo. Maybe human and Hedgehog can coexist within each other. No, that's not what I meant. As a result of his failure to find balance, Shadow now views his experiences in extremes. Truly moving on to him is ceasing all thoughts about what hurt him, and ruminating on the past is to fully lose yourself in it, equal to chasing an impossible dream. When he sees Maria and Gerald again, this is where this mindset really starts hurting him the most. Understandably, he begins to bargain once they're actually in front of his eyes, as I presume many of us who've lost people important to us would. And because of this dichotomy, he begins to sink into that dream. There can't be a balance, so if he has a chance to chase the past, why not let himself do it? It's very fitting in this sense that he simultaneously begins to have to deal with Doom's encroaching influence through his budding powers, and all the mutations and anger that come with them are equally reflective of a temptation within Shadow to fall back on past coping mechanisms. Not only does he want his family back, but in accepting that, he finds himself indulging that long-forgotten fury again. After all, why did he even lose them in the first place? This acts as the major through line through the game's plot, and even if you didn't catch it at first glance, it crops up with distinct parallels in obvious places. The boss fights. Of course, you have the Bio-Lizard, who is literally a fragment of Shadow in his past, one Shadow openly talks about ending the suffering of for its own good, but then you also have the deep cuts. Let's start with Metal Sonic, or Metal Overlord, rather. Back in my old-ass video about Sonic Heroes, I discussed how Metal's arc in that game essentially revolved around his inability to seek his own identity, and his desire to supersede his purpose, i.e. destroying Sonic and thus finally escaping his shadow. Which, you know, pretty dog shit plan, those are obviously two different guys, to become something wholly his own despite being built in the Blue Hedgehog's image. Ultimately, his desire for actualization is flawed, as he can only try to forcibly coalesce the aspects of others in order to distinguish himself. At the end of the day, he's still only taking from others without living among and in support of them, like Sonic and his friends so often do. Shadow, by contrast, has always had a strong sense of individuality from the moment he was introduced. Even when the possibility that his memories may be a complete fabrication is broached with him, he remains certain of what it means to him and how it actively drives his life. Even if my memories are fake, it's still me, Shadow. What you have here is a fight between someone desperate to have their own personality and someone whose sense of self has been torn in so many multiple directions that it is an active struggle to choose that personality for themselves in the face of so many people telling them what it should be. Metal is a good mirror to Shadow's fear of losing himself, of having his fate decided for him and told who he must be, to the detriment of his selfhood. Meanwhile, Mephiles is a really funny case. Obviously, because the plot of Sonic 06 has been blown out of existence due to the actions of Sonic and Elise at its end, we have this plot-convenient rift to thank for getting a glimpse at how the big bad mouthless man is reacting to his defeat. Badly. He's reacting to it badly.
You have no idea what I've had to go through. Let's try this again. Hi, my name is Shadow. What's yours? It's Mephiles! Actually, don't tell me. I don't care. Yes, that's precisely my problem. You've prevented me from even existing! Skill issue. The only pockets of existence I can scrounge is from fanfiction. Do you know what those people have done to me? Do you? I think we've already established that I know nothing about you and that I also don't care. You're not very good at listening. I'm going to start beating you now. I don't know when I'll stop.
Disregarding the absolute hilarity that comes with Shadow kicking his ass back into the void of irrelevance, I think Mr. Mephisto here also reflects an interesting aspect of Shadow's struggle back at himself. That being his missing memory from throughout Sonic Heroes and his self-titled game. During that period, Shadow couldn't really remember a lot about himself, and the resulting internal struggle that came from people both well and ill-meaning rushing to be the first to tell him who he was supposed to be. Mephiles, though a long-living entity as part of Solaris, shaped his individual physical form after Shadow himself, as he was the one who initially trapped and released him from his big bad scepter in Sonic 06. In a sense, he takes on a similar quality to Metal Sonic here, though it goes in a different direction. Mephiles is not made to be like Shadow, but he always represented something about Shadow in terms of their interlinked narrative. Mephiles stood as a testament to the way people would eventually view Shadow, as monstrous, untamed, and in need of suppression. When the world inevitably falls to ruin, all of the people who once heralded Shadow as a savior will turn their backs on him and blame him for the fall. That's what he always posited. Shadow worked to defy this inevitability, though, accepting that even if the world were to become his enemy, he would continue to fight back. Now we have a Mephiles who, through his defeat, has effectively been rendered non-existent, yet is desperate to be permitted a place in the world. This perfectly mirrors who Shadow used to be, a splintered person whose rage was all that drove him, and who persisted to the end of his individual benefit, revenge, while turning his back on the world around him. During the period of amnesia he suffered, Shadow was constantly lured back toward this facet of himself that, while addressed, hadn't had time to fully heal, and was thus easily exploited by others. That part of himself even then struggled to surface and exist, but for Shadow's own benefit, he banished it into irrelevance by choosing to become a different person. Mephiles is the last remaining vestige of this attitude, proving that old tricks just won't do it anymore, acting as a microcosm of just why Doom's original plan was always poised to fail, and why it needed to change this time to even be remotely effective. But just as Shadow says to Mephiles at the end of their fight, there is no future for you. Ever. To burn himself out in fury over what he's lost and over what he's poised yet to face would be to deny himself the light that peeks over the horizon when you hold to unwavering resistance. Only one of these two paths leads to a future, and it isn't the one where Shadow forsakes the world he lives in. After all people deserve a chance to be happy, right? I say deserve and not will be. Penders, I'm coming for you. Before we talk about Shadow's demonic hostage-taking foster father, though, we should do our due diligence and talk about his real dad. He's not a boss you fight in game, but he is in many ways just as big of an obstacle for Shadow to overcome. Oh, Gerald Robotnik, the man that you are. By which I mean, man, this guy is complicated, huh? He was already, but the Gerald journals scattered throughout this game tried their best at working overtime to stitch the disparate pieces of Project Shadow lore from over the years together seamlessly. They are very revealing to the type of character he is, and it solidifies what my read of him has pretty much always been, that he began with very noble wishes, but made very human choices along the way, which didn't always lead to the best outcomes. When the weight of those outcomes became too much for him, it eroded away his better judgment until he warped into somebody he would have been horrified to see if he were still in his right mind. Stepping right past the absolute insanity of seeing Gerald's two sons, one of them being the father of Maria and the other being the father of Eggman, we see right away that external troubles have always plagued this family. From the moment Maria was born, Gerald absolutely adored her, considering her his legacy. But after a stint of research on Angel Island, he was lured into a deadly deal. Excited to build the Ark, the Earth's first orbital space colony, Gerald had his first of many encounters with what we'd call a monkey's paw situation. The station would be funded and be able to conduct all sorts of beneficial research, but the one bankrolling it would be Gunn, who Gerald correctly suspected would be more interested in weapons of war than research to benefit mankind. In exchange for the then president trying to decrease Gunn's pressure, though, he asked for Gerald to research immortality, and though he initially refuses, that's when the first signs of Maria's illness begin to crop up. After some thorough mishaps with Emerald, an ancient weapon that one of his sons discovers, the pressure surmounts on all sides. Maria is formally diagnosed with neuroimmune deficiency syndrome, and though he's able to negotiate her way onto the Ark for study and treatment, her family is not pleased. He begins to ponder accepting the president's deal if it means he can discover a cure for her condition along the way. But as luck would have it, by the time he does accept, even the president can't get Gunn to back down from their demands for Gerald to go into weapons research. In fact, they're essentially demanding he do so at the risk of revoking all funding, and right now, that's not something he can afford. To buy himself time, Gerald uses his research from Angel Island, some of which focused around chaos, to create the artificial chaos and chaos drives, which he hopes will be capable of more noble use, but reluctantly accepts the more likely application if it means they'll stop breathing down his neck for a little while. It's too bad, then, that the project keeps hitting brick walls, the biolizard being the first major failure, unable to support its own rapid growth and being sealed away within the Ark's core. Maria's family grows more impatient and resentful during this time, and this all leads into the perfect storm rolling in when the Black Comet passes. Gerald meets with and reluctantly accepts the deal from Black Doom to create Shadow with his DNA, but nothing is calming down. The top brass threatens to freeze Project Shadow, so Gerald reluctantly hands off Emerald to them. When even that doesn't satisfy them, he develops the Eclipse Cannon. In his mind, its abilities are so catastrophic, nigh world-endingly so, that Gunn will never find an excuse to actually fire it, whereas it will be the perfect weapon to destroy the Black Arms if they ever come back to Earth. Nobody tell him. As all of these issues become more prominent, the clock keeps ticking down, and now even Gerald's sons have begun falling out. Gerald's lack of communication with them has caused them to feel neglected and start arguing over whether he has favoritism for one or the other, particularly with how he focuses on Maria. He tries to keep his head above water, getting design suggestions from Maria and even a sweet little suggestion for the project's name, but Gerald can't stave off the feeling of desperation welling up inside of him. As Shadow finally awakens and develops a close relationship with Maria, her parents try for and succeed at having another child. A girl who has none of Maria's medical conditions. Gerald takes this as confirmation that they're ready to move on and essentially replace Maria, to which he ceases referring to Maria's father as "my son" and begins to call him Maria's parent. All he wants anymore is to restore what he had, and yet time marches on. Emerald goes on a rampage, destroying much of the Ark before he can be locked down, and this also causes the artificial chaos to go off the deep end. Though this was mostly handled by Shadow, Gunn is already made aware of the incident. Because of this, and a desire to cover up anything to do with Project Shadow, Gunn does what we know happens next. They invade the space colony. Gerald and many of the residents are preemptively removed, and many of the staff are killed. Maria, of course, is also killed. And though Gunn confiscates Shadow after his development is completed, Gerald has already tampered with his mind to set his revenge into motion, which of course will inevitably lead to the events we play through in Sonic Adventure 2. So, yeah, more loaded than one of Shadow's handguns. Calling the situation fraught is an understatement. It is no wonder that Shadow would have complicated feelings about the man, which makes seeing him as he once was all the more tragic. He finds Whitespace to be almost novel, and though he can tell Shadow is different, he begs for him not to disclose what happens in the future, as it would only cause problems for the stability of time.
Whatever will be, whatever has been, must remain intact. Think of it this way. If you changed our past, it would rewrite your future. All your triumphs, all you've learned, all the good you've done would cease to be. What will be, will be. Although, that is something I struggle with myself sometimes, if I'm being honest.
That pulls it all into perspective, right? But it's really these bits of dialogue from Maria that hammer it home for me.
I have good days and bad days. Right now, I'm okay. On the bad days, sometimes I can't see. Sometimes it's hard to move.
or to hold things, or to think clearly. It can be very scary and frustrating. But you've always been so patient and kind with me. Thank you, Shadow. I don't know what will happen after you win. Maybe we won't see each other for a long while. But I love you, and nothing can change that. No matter how far apart we are, my love will always be with you. Please, always remember that.
The truth is, despite how painfully complicated Shadow's past is, it is what made him the person he is, for better and for worse. It's not wrong for Shadow to want to let go of that baggage and become his own person, far from it, but not allowing himself to consider it a part of him in trying to escape its shadow for so long, he hasn't allowed himself the grace to truly heal, not fully. Forcing yourself not to think about something doesn't mean you've overcome it, right? It's why it feels so significant to me when, even at the risk of being overwhelmed by Doom's influence once again, Shadow remembers himself, who he really is, the person he sculpted himself to be despite the tragedy that has often defined him. He promises to Maria that he won't give in to that influence, that he will overcome his anger and instead use his strength to make others happy, like she wanted, with a little smile. Gerald, meanwhile, reminds Shadow that a balance is always worth keeping. He says that Shadow shouldn't just define his life by his promise to Maria, but should remember to do what makes him happy and live up to his potential as well. A tall order for someone built to have limitless potential. He voices his regrets for the path he's unwittingly put Shadow on, but commends him on how he's chosen to walk it. It is an incredibly sweet yet simultaneously heartbreaking note to leave off on for his character, as we can almost take this, in some ways, to be closure for how Gerald would go on to manipulate Shadow once he went off the deep end, modifying his memory to use him for revenge against humanity. Though the Gerald he's seeing right now obviously doesn't know what's going to happen, Shadow does, and so do we. And it's a reminder of the goodness that still existed in this man, why Shadow would ever have cared about him in the first place despite these things. It doesn't escape me that one of the last things he ever says in this game is telling Shadow that he's proud of him, and calling him son. Considering the strained relationship filled with regret that he's come to have with his actual children, this hits hard. And that at last leads us to the finale, where Shadow finally faces off against Black Doom.
I take it you didn't bring me my cheese.
It has been 19 years, what do you think?
I think it must be expired by now.
And soon enough you will be too.
Okay, kind of a good one, I'm not gonna lie.
I initially found it funny that Doom could only bother to keep dragging out Radical Highway, and I'm not the only one, but I think people have the right idea when they say this is a thematically strong choice regardless. I would have loved to see some variation, the Black Comet maybe, but aside from being Shadow's first ever stage in the series, this is, as many have pointed out, the time at which Shadow was the most vengeful and angry he's ever been. Radical Highway is literally the set piece where Shadow has one of his most famous cutscenes, the I Promise You Revenge scene, where we get our first ever flashback of Maria in the entire series. This is a place Doom torments Shadow with because it reminds him of what it was like to be filled with hate, to just want everything and everyone around him to perish. For a Shadow who has tried so hard to let go of that past and move on, this has to be something that nags at him, shames him. It's meant to break down his fragile defenses even more. But Shadow already knows that this anger doesn't define him, that his creator can't control him.
It's all right, Maria. I'm letting go of that destructive anger. But I will continue to fight. Fight with your wish in my heart. Your wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy.
He fights Doom not just to stop him, but to completely sever the bond between them. I said back in my analysis of Shadow 05 that Black Doom is like a manipulative dad, one that abandons and isolates Shadow but burdens him with expectation when it becomes convenient for him. He's the jerk who only ever treats you like garbage but still insists that he's your real family, and Maria solidly refutes that.
You may share his DNA, but he is not your true family. Your real family loves you and wants you to be safe and happy.
Cannot deny what you are. We are one and the same.
I am Shadow the Hedgehog. This is the destiny I choose.
In finally destroying him, breaking free from his overbearingly possessive grip, Shadow cuts that final thread binding him to Black Doom. And all of this culminates in why I think this ending speaks so much to me. I'm not bothered by Shadow having a momentary freak out when Gerald and Maria inevitably begin to disappear again. I'm not bothered by his bargaining to keep them around. I don't think that this is a regression for him, because honestly, this is the perfect balancing point he's reached. He's finally able to accept everything, and Maria's words cement it once again.
I don't want to be frozen in one place in time. Besides, your friends need your help.
But you don't know what's going to happen.
I know I'll see you again. And if fate draws us apart, I will always be in your heart.
Maria.
Shadow is done defining himself by his past, but he also doesn't need to turn fully away from it. That's how trauma, and especially grief, so often is. Forcing yourself not to think about it can only get you so far, because it will create a permanent hole inside of you. There's just no way to prevent that. It is what it is. What will be, will be. But at the same time, that's okay, because you don't need to completely forget your past to overcome it. You just need to live alongside it. You'll have good days and bad days. On some, you'll be doing all right. And on others, it will be scary and frustrating. But be patient with yourself, because what has affected you, what you've lost, it's not your entire life. It will always be there, but every flower in a garden withers eventually. It doesn't mean that new ones can't grow around it. I've very recently been made aware of the harsh realities of living with grief. I think this ending is the far more realistic and cathartic outcome for Shadow's character growth. No, I'm not saying Shadow has to be sad about Maria all the time, or that he can't largely move on to other things, but I also don't think it's bad for him to still have his moments, to let himself still feel upset over this, while being able to pick himself back up, remember why it matters to him, and create something better for himself. Shadow the Hedgehog is a character that I think, to many, has been largely defined by his edge. We say that jokingly, and I'm certain there are some people who really do think that a scowl and a cheesy gunshot sound effect are all there is to him. But for those who looked deeper, you know that isn't true. Shadow the Hedgehog as a character matters to me because he is a very frank examination of the hurt we feel when we endure tremendous loss. A narrative that is embedded into such a regularly positive series, a series marketed towards children. And while its theatrics are always suitably dramatic for the sake of those cartoony sensibilities, it never shies away from the genuine weight we feel when those emotions are placed on our shoulders. In that way, many kids were able to see their own struggles through the vector of Shadow and begin to reconcile with those feelings for the first time. Only now that I myself have experienced grief more up close and personal do I see that it never stopped being relevant. That's why I just can't take the idea of this being a regression of Shadow's character seriously. That's not how processing these facets of ourselves work. Trauma and loss are not pieces of our psyche that we can simply defeat and banish into irrelevance. They're not demons who fall out of the sky with a well-timed anime special move. Beyond any kind of metaphorical monster that they're represented by, they are hurdles, big and small, that we will have to overcome for the rest of our lives. Some days will be easier, some will be hard, but it will always be possible for you to make it through them. This year, Sega has been doing a sort of Year of Shadow event to coincide with this game and the new movie, a renaissance for the character and what he's meant to so many people over time. The theme of the Year of Shadow, according to them, is fearless, and I couldn't have picked a better word for it myself. It takes a lot of bravery to come back from something so harsh, to get out of the mud and move on with your life, even though you know those memories are always going to be there. But no matter what, we can't always fear what we have to lose. We have to remember what we've gained, and what we'll continue to gain, with time and effort. Some voids can't be filled, but relative to everything else we make of our lives, they can become a smaller part of it. And that's what Shadow Generation's story meant to me. It was a reminder that we can backslide, we can fall down, and we can suffer from familiar pains. But so long as we allow ourselves to learn, to grow, and to make something out of ourselves, we will always gain more ground than we've lost. And in regular generations, the message is that the power of friendship can't save you from a terrible final boss fight. Good night, everybody! Hey, thanks so much for watching my silly little video about the sad hedgehog that made me sad. I'm working on other stuff, but I wanted to put this out in the meantime because 1, it's been a while, and 2, I really like this game and I felt like chatting about it. If you'd like to support my inane ramblings, think about leaving a comment below that isn't my home address and social security number. You could also like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. YouTube likes that. YouTube likes when you do that. I don't care what YouTube likes, but it doesn't like me, but I do like paying my bills, and YouTube unfortunately decides if I can do that. So appeasing the beast's insatiable hunger helps me live another day. Speaking of beast appeasement, you can make it more likely for me to skate by without its approval if you toss me some dosh on Patreon. It'll buy your way into my fan Discord server, which is a blast. There's also Ko-fi for one-time donations if you're feeling that more, or channel membership, which accomplishes a similar thing, but also gives you access to funny channel emojis to use in my stream chats. Oh yeah, I also stream pretty often, usually voice acting my way through visual novels, but not always. I streamed my blind reaction to this game when it came out, as a matter of fact, and I'm in the process of doing the same for Ace Attorney 5, if you subscribed while I was screaming about that franchise last year. Consider stopping by if you can't get enough NezumiVA in your life, as I tend to stream at least once a week. And now I'd like to thank some of the wonderful people who make this whole shebang possible, such as Serena Midori, Shogun DX, Friend of Dracula, Ali Oliver, Claire Meeboon, Bailey, Noelle Hadley, Joseph Adams, WeCon, MJL, Lord Omega 12, White Toast, Lay Fam, T, Saxon, 16 Crows in a Trenchcoat, Cass Reed, Indigo, Horsefry, CJ the Magic Goose, Niche Fish, JS, Phantom Falcon, Harley, Sad Boy Alert, Space Battery, Moiba Alsue, Big Yellow, Digimaniac 33, Sable Cowl, D-Bear, Elaine Allfelt, Sidra Hitching, Queen Elzyme, Waterbrat, Deviant Witch, Zero Enderborn, Bank Pads, Clovercool, Noah, Me Substitution, Everett Neely, Luna, Jane Yarley, Matt Hop, and Jeff Ladd. Thank you all so much for your support and patience while I've been turning into pudding this year. I hope to pull myself together as 2025 comes screaming to horrifying reality in the next few months, and if we're all lucky, I can get in some more stuff next year while we're dodging the flaming wreckage of nightmares that descend upon us all. Peace be with you. Bye!